Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Evangelist Nick Garrett channel. I'm super excited because today is the first video in what will be an ongoing series giving you a brief history of each of the bishops of Rome and what later became the popes. There have been something like 240 of them. And if you're not Catholic, this history is just as important to you. We have to remember until the period right after the Renaissance when the Reformation was born officially. These people influenced their lives just as much as Catholics. We're going to find intrigue. We're going to find some good, some bad. Most of all, it's important because Christianity has a 2,000-year arc of history. And by learning about these individuals, it gives us a focal point to place events, people in the correct time space. Today, we're starting with the Apostle Peter, the person who was alongside Jesus Christ. And one of the primary sources that we're using to tell these stories is called the Liber Pontificalis. The Liber is a very interesting book because the editors that have worked with it over the centuries have admitted themselves that the book is loaded with forgeries and afterthoughts. But the cool part about the book is it shows us where they are. So as we learn, we know what is right and what is probably a later addition or forgery. There's probably more scrutiny surrounding the idea that Peter was a special pope or bishop of Rome than surrounding any other person. First of all, the term pope doesn't come until much, much later. Was Peter the bishop of Rome? Well, it's hard to tell based on biblical sources alone. We do have some other sources that show us what we might need to know. But I can tell you this first. Peter was from Antioch. He was the son of a man named John, and he started out after becoming a Christian and after the death of Christ as the Bishop of Antioch. He's followed by a man named Evodius, and then after Evodius, the famous Ignatius of Antioch, whose 7 letters gave us the first prominent Christian writings of antiquity. Let me touch on a few points that I find to be interesting about what it says about Peter. In the Liber Pontificalis, when there are differences in sources, they tell us. The earliest writing says, "Blessed Peter, the Antiochene, son of John of the province of Galilee and the town of Bethsaida, brother of Andrew and chief of the apostles." Later it was revised to this, "Blessed Peter, the apostle and chief of the apostles." So Peter, right away, the emphasis on this second one is that, hey, Peter is ahead of all the other apostles. The Antiochian, son of John of the province of Galilee and the town of Bethsaida, brother of Andrew. He first occupied the bishopric of Antioch for 7 years. Then Peter entered the city of Rome when Nero was Caesar, and he occupied the bishopric there for 25 years. There's a discrepancy, though. If you sit down and look at the timelines of the bishops of Antioch and the bishops of Rome, you'll quickly notice there's a discrepancy between the year 64 and 67 AD. First of all, historians speculate which year Nero's fire was. It is said that Peter was killed as a martyr during that period, whether 64 or 67. But the slathering of sources we have from that period don't give us a definitive answer. So the best we can say is that Peter died sometime between 64 and 67. He was bishop for 25 years, 1 month, and 8 days. He was bishop during the time of Tiberius Caesar, Gaius, Tiberius Claudius, and Nero, these 4 leaders, allegedly. Listen to this. This is interesting, and we don't hear this much in Christian tradition, probably because it is perhaps a forgery. Paul wrote 2 epistles which are called Catholic, and the Gospel of Mark. For Mark was his disciple and son by baptism. Afterward, the whole source of the 4 Gospels, which were confirmed by inquiring of him, that is Peter, and obtaining his testimony, although one gospel is couched in Greek, another in Hebrew, another in Latin, yet by his testimony they were all confirmed. I think we can pretty much say that that is not historically accurate, but it certainly is interesting. Duquesne, who is the prominent scholar to have worked with Liber Pontificalis, says the idea that the 4 Gospels all issued from a single source was derived from the apsidal mosaics of 5th and 6th century churches, which represented the four rivers of paradise, all flowing out from one head. The four rivers of paradise, think about the early account in the book of Genesis, right? The four rivers talked about there. He ordained two bishops, Linus and Cletus, both of whom would follow him in the bishopric of Rome. We'll talk about them in the future episodes. They fulfilled all the services of the priests in the city of Rome and the inhabitants for strangers. After he had thus disposed affairs, he received the crown of martyrdom with Paul in the year 38 after the Lord's Passion. Well, what that means is not the year 38 AD, but at this time they believed Christ had been crucified in the year 29. You add the 29 to the 38, and you get that between 64 and 67 time period. Allegedly, Peter and Paul died in the 13th year of Nero's reign. We get more information from a book called the Epistle of Clement to the Corinthians, an extra biblical text. Now, one thing that is interesting, the burial place of Peter is something we can count on. It's well known. And many of the popes, for a century or two after, are continually noted for having organized it, set up new gravestones, held special services there. So as we go further along the line, we will find very interesting information on this. Now, on the question of whether or not Peter was Pope. Well, first of all, no, he wasn't Pope, because that term did not exist. This is also prior to the time when Rome would have sought papal authority. Let me explain what I mean. One of the dynamics you'll see through the first 1,000 years of church history is Rome always exerting a dominance toward fatherhood over the whole church. Whereas in the Eastern Church, Byzantium would become Constantinople, you always saw a move toward brotherhood in the church. That is until Rome fell and the Emperor Justinian in the East saw that by necessity he should be in charge of a unified church. There's always attempts by Rome throughout history to exert fatherhood and dominance. We don't know quite why. Early in Christianity, after that biblical period, we have 5 major Christian centers: Jerusalem, Antioch, Alexandria, Byzantium, and Rome. We know that Rome was very popular. They had 14 synagogues where Christians were free to come and worship, and it's a very interesting time. That's about all we can say for Peter today, other than to end on this. When the Reformation began, Martin Luther looked at the passage of Peter Petros as the rock, and on this rock I will build my church. And he seems to presume the potential of a different account happening. The way it was interpreted was that Jesus and Peter are identifying themselves. Peter correctly identifies Jesus and who he is. And Jesus says, "And you are Petros, rock, and upon this rock will I build my church." The allegation there meaning Peter, build the church. But there are a couple details, context, that might change what the meaning of that actually was. One, where were they standing? They were standing in an old city, a pagan worshiping city with great pagan idols on the high places. Jesus was also there. Peter was there. And it is possible that Peter's saying, "You are the Son of the living God." And Jesus says, "That's right, Peter. And on this rock," talking about himself, or "on this rock," talking about the high places of idolatry near Mount Hermon where the fallen angels fell, "I will build my church." That's certainly a potential take on it. It's impossible to say nowadays, even with the best exegesis. Anyway, friends, I hope you enjoyed this first episode talking about the bishops of Rome and the popes. Stick with it. We'll get them out as soon as we can. And I'm looking forward to this series, myself learning about all these different people in church history. God bless you. May your work today bear fruit. Please visit my Teespring store to check out a cool t-shirt for yourself. I've got the Underground Catacombs of Rome, Truth First Christianity on the back. There were Nephilim on the earth in those days hoodies, Truth First Christianity mugs. and t-shirts in men and women's sizes. Also, you can purchase books I've written on Amazon.com/author/Nicholas Garrett. You can get any of the books from the Just Tell Me the Truth About Christianity series. I am editing Just Tell Me the Truth About the Reformation and Counter-Reformation with the hopes of having it out by Christmas time. You can also buy my nonfiction work, Shipwrecked in the Land of King Tobacco, the first Washington family immigrant to America, about George Washington's great-grandfather John. I would appreciate your support in these ways because that helps me put food on the table and you get something of great value for it. Thanks again, and I look forward to talking to you next time.